Hello and welcome. The contemporary global health landscape is characterized by an unprecedented epidemic of chronic diseases, coinciding paradoxically with technological advancement and increased healthcare expenditure. Chronic disease represents not an inevitable consequence of human aging or genetic predisposition, but rather the predictable outcome of engineered systems that prioritize economic efficiency over biological compatibility. This pattern reflects a deeper issue: illness arising not from natural causes alone, but from human industrial and technological activities that disrupt the balance between biology and environment. Through insights from functional medicine, environmental health science, and social philosophy, a paradigm shift is necessary from symptom management to root cause intervention. The narrative of human progress typically celebrates technological innovation and industrial advancement as unqualified improvements to human welfare. However, this optimism conceals a stark contradiction. Despite enormous investments in medical technologies and pharmaceutical treatments, chronic disease rates continue to climb globally, and life expectancy has begun to decline in developed nations. This paradox invites a re-examination of the foundational assumptions behind modern health paradigms. One key concept is anthropogenic disease, pathologies arising from the interaction between human biology and artificially created environments. Unlike infectious diseases or purely genetic conditions, anthropogenic diseases emerge from systemic exposure to industrial chemicals, processed foods, and other stressors alien to human evolutionary development. These are not random afflictions, but the cumulative outcome of living in a world engineered for economic utility rather than human flourishing. Diseases in this category are shaped not primarily by individual genetics or behavior, but by social, economic, and technological systems. This reframing challenges the prevailing medical approach that emphasizes personal responsibility while ignoring structural determinants. Environmental exposures, often involuntary, are critical factors in chronic illness, making prevention and healing a matter of collective, not just individual responsibility. The roots of this problem can be traced back to the post-World War II boom in industrial chemistry and mechanized agriculture. Many chemicals now found in our food, water, and air were originally developed for warfare, later repurposed for civilian industries with minimal safety oversight. Organophosphates, for example, evolved from nerve agents and were reintroduced as pesticides. Similarly, herbicides like Agent Orange found new lives in agricultural contexts. This trajectory reflects a technological development model that prioritizes short-term utility over long-term safety. Regulatory systems often require proof of acute harm before restricting substances, while chronic, low-level exposures, common to most modern toxicants, remain poorly understood and inadequately regulated. In effect, populations have been enrolled in a vast, uncontrolled experiment testing human resilience to chemical saturation. One of the most insidious consequences of this exposure is bioaccumulation, the gradual build-up of toxins in body tissues over time. Unlike acute poisoning, which causes immediate symptoms, bioaccumulation leads to subclinical toxicity that may manifest as chronic illness years or decades later. Metals such as lead and mercury become embedded in bones and organs, subtly impairing biological systems in ways conventional testing often fails to detect. This toxic legacy doesn't end with individual bodies. Studies have shown that newborn babies today are born with hundreds of synthetic chemicals detectable in their cord blood, an inherited burden that alters early development and increases vulnerability to chronic conditions. In this way, industrial society has introduced a new, non-genetic form of inheritance, the transmission of environmental degradation across generations. Nowhere is this problem more visible than in modern food systems. Industrial agriculture has dramatically increased chemical exposure through the use of pesticides, herbicides, and synthetic fertilizers. Glyphosate, the world's most widely used herbicide, is found in the majority of food samples tested. Far from benign, such substances have been linked to endocrine disruption, immune dysfunction, and microbiome dysbiosis. These impacts are rarely isolated. When chemicals interact in the human body, their combined effect, known as the toxicological cocktail effect, can be significantly more harmful than any single compound alone. Yet current regulatory practices typically assess chemicals in isolation, failing to account for the real-world complexity of human exposures. In addition to agriculture, extractive industries such as mining produce staggering amounts of environmental waste. Over 190 billion tons of mining waste are generated each year, contaminating air, water, and soil with heavy metals and industrial byproducts. This pollution extends far beyond the mine site, with catastrophic containment failures spreading toxins across entire regions and entering food chains and water systems. The sheer scale of this contamination dwarfs municipal waste and underscores the global scope of environmental degradation driving chronic disease. While environmental exposure initiates much of the chronic disease burden, the medical system compounds the problem by focusing on symptoms rather than causes. The dominant healthcare model designed around identifying disease labels and prescribing drugs was developed in the context of acute infections and injuries, not the complex systemic illnesses of modernity. As a result, chronic disease is treated as a lifelong condition to be managed, not reversed or prevented. This approach often leads to polypharmacy, the use of multiple medications to treat overlapping symptoms. Among older adults, polypharmacy is now the norm, with many taking 5, 10, or even more drugs daily. This creates risks of adverse interactions, cognitive decline, and increased hospitalizations. Ironically, the very system meant to heal becomes a source of further illness, an institutionalized form of iatrogenic disease. Economically, this model is deeply entrenched. Pharmaceutical companies profit not from cures, but from chronic treatment. A system built on disease maintenance, not resolution, creates powerful disincentives to explore root causes or support preventative care. Worse still, the same corporations often dominate both food and pharmaceutical markets, profiting first from the sale of ultra-processed, disease-promoting products, and then from the drugs required to manage the resulting illnesses. In contrast to this reductionist, pharmaceutical-centered model, functional medicine offers a holistic, systems biology approach. It treats chronic illness as the result of accumulated imbalances, nutritional deficiencies, toxic exposures, inflammatory triggers, and seeks to correct these upstream factors through personalized interventions. Rather than managing disease indefinitely, functional medicine aims to restore the body's innate healing capacity. This model has produced promising results. Protocols such as Dr. Dale Bredeson's multifactorial approach to cognitive decline have shown reversal of early dementia symptoms. Similarly, comprehensive lifestyle interventions have led to sustained remission of type 2 diabetes, once considered a progressive and irreversible disease. These successes reveal what becomes possible when healthcare targets the roots rather than the branches of chronic illness. Diet is central to this healing process. The rise of industrialized processed foods, marks one of the most significant shifts in human health history. These foods, stripped of nutritional complexity and laced with additives, disrupt metabolism and promote chronic inflammation. Traditional whole foods, by contrast, offer protective phytochemicals, balanced macronutrients, and nutrients in bioavailable forms, products of ecological relationships cultivated over millennia. However, even whole foods have suffered under industrial agriculture. Decades of chemical fertilizers, monoculture farming, and soil erosion have dramatically reduced the nutrient density of crops. Studies now show declines in vitamins, minerals, and protein content compared to mid-20th century baselines. Modern food not only delivers empty calories, but lacks the nourishment required for health. The crisis is systemic. It is reinforced by economic structures that profit from sickness. The $1.3 trillion pharmaceutical industry relies on rising rates of chronic disease to sustain growth, while food conglomerates drive demand for addictive, ultra-processed products. Their interests are deeply embedded in policymaking, facilitated by regulatory capture, a situation in which the agencies meant to oversee public safety are steered by the very industries they regulate. This dynamic is particularly apparent in the regulation of agricultural chemicals. Safety evaluations often rely on industry-sponsored studies and fail to test long-term, low-dose or synergistic effects. As a result, dangerous substances remain on the market, protected not by scientific integrity, but by political inertia and economic influence. The public, in turn, bears the burden of proof to demonstrate harm after widespread exposure has already occurred. Faced with this landscape, public health policy must evolve from treating disease to preventing it. Effective prevention requires systemic action, regulating harmful exposures, restructuring food systems, and reorienting economic incentives toward wellness. Health should be created, not merely restored, through policies that address housing, education, environmental justice, and income inequality. Such measures demand cooperation across sectors, transcending the limited jurisdiction of health ministries and involving agriculture, urban planning, education, and economic policy. Ultimately, individual lifestyle changes, while valuable, cannot solve a problem rooted in structural dysfunction. Real progress will depend on transforming the systems that generate disease in the first place. This means revising agricultural subsidies, enforcing stricter environmental protections, and overhauling healthcare financing to reward prevention and healing rather than chronic symptom control. The chronic disease epidemic is not an accident. It is the logical consequence of a civilization that values short-term economic growth over long-term biological integrity. Recognizing this allows us to shift the conversation from managing decline to cultivating resilience. The anthropogenic disease model shows that many chronic conditions are not inevitable, they are reversible with the right interventions, given at the right scale. But the challenge is not merely scientific, it is political and moral. Will we choose to prioritize human health over corporate profit? No. Just as with the climate catastrophe we are in denial, can we restructure our systems to reflect biological truths rather than economic abstractions? The answer to these questions will shape the future of public health and the legacy we leave for coming generations. The task before us is not to innovate more technologies for managing illness, but to rediscover the principles of harmony between humans and the natural systems upon which we depend. The question is not whether we can build healthier societies, it is whether we will summon the will to do so before the cost becomes irreversible.